Hello and welcome to my review of the T95K Pro Android TV box. This is a quick shot showing you the included accessories, which are very much standard for an Android box nowadays. You have the remote, HDMI lead and power adapter. It's worth looking at the specs on this particular box using the S912 chipset, which is quite common for upper level box now, or upper mid-level box. You'll see we have support for H.265 codec and we have 2 gig of RAM and 16 gig ROM. Looking at the remote control, this one is one of the newer types. It has an LED at the top, and you can also program it by pressing the top power button here and then picking the button that you wish to program and then mapping that from the remote. The recommended one would probably be the television remote, so you can control the source and volume. Now looking at the case, we've got quite a nice funky colour design on this one. It's quite different to most of the slightly predictable black boxes. And on the side we have a USB and SD card slot, micro SD on the back, the HDMI, Ethernet port, another USB port, the AV port, and there's an optical as well as the power input. Now we'll also take a quick look at the front LED display too. On the underside we have the 4 rubber pads. Now when the box is off, you'll see there's nothing on it, and then you power up, you get the display and a power LED as well next to that. That's pretty bright, and in my view it's probably not particularly needed either because you have the display next to it. Now booting up, you get the standard animation now on many of the boxes. It's just been changed for this specific model. And we also have a fairly standard layout with the media box on the main home screen here, and you can customize the bottom menu bar to include the apps that you wish quick access to. It works pretty well, don't really have any problems with this particular one. It's perhaps preferable to the ones that pin specific apps like Netflix if you're not going to use them, although you do have the Google Play there. You can also root it as well. As you can see, that just opened up. You do get a few apps included with this, although it's not particularly heavy on the app side out of the box. You can also customize the video menu and put specific shortcuts to apps in there as well. You do have a memory cleanup tool, though with 2 GB of RAM you're probably not going to need it that often. Now there was one thing that I did notice: when you dismiss the navigation bar at the bottom you can't bring it back, and I've seen that on a couple of other Android boxes that I've had, so that's a bug there which perhaps needs fixing. You also have a good selection of streams added to Kodi. We'll just run through some of the pre-installed ones now. You've got a pretty good selection there out of the box, so if you don't want to mess around too much and have everything ready to go, it's pretty good on that side of things. If you wish to go in and add some more streams, they've configured it fairly easily with the add-on installer here in specific categories, and there's a good few pages if you wish to add specific streams. As with Kodi, you can also add other streams to it as well, and there's some pretty good guides around on that too. Once you get into the settings menu, you get the traditional look which you get on most of the Android boxes that I've used. Now for this particular box I have tested for some updates on this, but I couldn't find any, so hopefully they'll perhaps look at that navigation bar issue. In terms of storage, you do have around about the 11 GB free, and you can also expand that with the micro SD card slot. It's also possible to customize the power key definition, so instead of suspending it, you can actually power off the unit. Once you get into the more settings, you end up in the more traditional standard Android look, running Android 6 on this particular model. Note we do have Bluetooth, and we also have dual band Wi-Fi with this model too. It's pretty much loaded as far as the spec goes. You have screencasting as well. Now I've run a few benchmarks on the box just to get an idea. You can compare this to the other reviews that I've done. So for this test I'm using a Geekbench 4 just to get an idea of the processor performance, so we'll let that run. We end up with a multi-core score of 1865, which is about in line with the other boxes that I've used with this chipset. Some bench slightly higher. If you run the test multiple times you'll probably find a slight variation in the results. But either way, the performance is a decent step up from the quad-core boxes that I've looked at. Now this particular test is Bonsai Test, which is a 3D rendering one. This gives you an idea of the performance for games and things like that, and as you can see, we have a good result here of 33.3, and that's a good 10-12 frames per second above many of the quad-core Android boxes that are around. So a good choice if you're into the gaming side of things. On the Wi-Fi, it did well. I had above average speeds. We're getting up to just over 33.5 megabits per second. Now, wrapping up with this particular box, I'll start with the areas that I don't particularly like. The front LED is a bit bright for my liking, and it's pretty much redundant with the display next to it. That's a minor annoyance. You can just move it slightly out of your line of sight. The USB ports are USB 2, not USB 3, the newer type, and I would prefer if they fix the bug with the navigation bar, but it's not a showstopper. The good side is the graphics performance is very good. The processor is a nice bump up from the quad-core mid-level boxes, and the remote can be programmed. Even though it's not an Air mouse, you probably want to pick up one of those keyboards, touchpad keyboards or Air mice, and the price is actually pretty good for a box of this spec, so certainly worth a look if the style appeals.